Hello viewers, welcome to Study with Master Notes. Again we are back now. I will cover today Unit 6, the background of Scarlet letter of American literature, your MEG06, and please keep subscribe, like and share my channel and commenting in the comment box. Okay, so we will start Unit 6 background. I will be very happy if you keep commenting in the comment box and subscribe and like my channel. Please like, share and subscribe. Okay, so here it is Unit 6 background, the structure, objective, introduction, Hawthorne's life and works, American fiction, latest sum up, glossary, questions and suggested readings. So what are the objectives of this MEG6 Unit 6 background? Okay, our primary objective in this unit is to give you an idea of the background, both historical and literary, that shaped Hawthorne as an author of the Scarlet letter. His life and works would also be examined carefully. Okay, so who was the author of the Scarlet letter? Here is the NET questions you can ask. You can write in NET exam also. The Scarlet letter, it's a very important question. Your exam point of view. Okay, so author is the Hawthorne, Hawthorne. Okay, Hawthorne as an author of the Scarlet letter. The Scarlet letter, Scarlet, Scarlet letter. His life and works would also be examined carefully. Here it is the introduction. Okay, so Hawthorne's life, this is the full name of Hawthorne is Nathaniel Hawthorne, 1862, photographed by Matthew B. Brady. Okay, so here is Nathaniel Hawthorne and 1862 photograph of Matthew B. Brady. Then come to the Scarlet letter and Nathaniel Hawthorne's background. Okay, what are his educational qualification, educational background, socio-cultural background, and what is his emotional psyche, we all discover in this page. Okay, Nathaniel Hawthorne, 1804 to 64, is an American writer who lived in New England, where we find the oldest settlements in America. The Scarlet letter 1850 is a work in which the writer has described vividly the life of the early settlers in which the writer has described vividly the life of the early settlers in a period known as colonial America. So here the Scarlet letter was published in 1850. The writer has described vividly the life of the early settlers in a period known as colonial America. As you will remember in the introduction in Block 1, most of the settlers in New England were Puritans and dissenters who had been persecuted by the Anglican Church in England. Okay, so in Block 1, most of the settlers in New England were Puritans and dissenters who had been persecuted by the Anglican Church in England. Okay, the New England were Puritans and dissenters who had been persecuted by the Anglican Church in England. Already you know in Block 1 of MEG6. These settlers had, however, come to New England with the belief that they were God's chosen people, and it was their sacred mission to set up a utopia in the new continent full of wilderness and savage native Indians. Okay, so they thought that, or they believed that they were God's chosen people. Already I have discussed in my previous videos. You can go through my previous videos which I already added in my description box. Okay, so in the very first chapter of Scarlet letter you will find the following statement: the founders of a new colony, whatever utopia of human virtue and happiness that might originally project, have invariably recognized it among their earliest practical necessities to allot a portion of the virgin soil as a cemetery and another portion as the site of a prison. Okay, so what are the utopia? What do you mean by utopia? Utopia are new things. Okay, the founders of a new colony, whatever utopia of human virtue and happiness might originally project, have invariably recognized it among their earliest practical necessities to allot a portion of the virgin soil as a cemetery and another portion as the site of a prison. Okay, so here two things are there. One is the virgin soil as a cemetery and happiness, and another portion as the site of the prison. Okay, it has also to be noted that the drama of sheen and redemption that is unfolded in the Scarlet Letter takes place in Boston, which was not then a mega city. Okay, so it has also been noted that drama of sheen and redemption that is unfolded in the Scarlet Letter takes place in Boston, which was not then a mega city. It was a small settlement of grim-faced shore and peevish Puritans who could not tolerate any dissent or challenge to authority. Okay, so Puritans were self-centered people. Okay, the Scarlet Letter takes place in Boston, which was not a mega city. So Boston is a small city. It was a small settlement of grim-faced shore and peevish Puritans. Okay, so peevish Puritans, they are very cruel. Okay, shore and peevish Puritans who could not tolerate any dissent or challenge to authority. Any dissent or challenge to authority they can't tolerate. Life in those days was regarded as a grim battle between good and evil, and the people believed that the black man, that is devil, was waiting in the forest to trap the souls of unwary people. Okay, so here at that time the life in those days regarded as a grim battle between good and evil, and the people believed that the black man as the devil. Okay, so black man was as a devil or monster who were waiting in the forest to trap the souls of unwary people. Unwary people means those people are not aware of their survival. Okay, in colonial New England the people also believed in witches acting as the agents of devil. Okay, in the New England colonial the people also believed in witches or monsters acting as the agents of devil. You will find in the Scarlet Letter an old lady, Mistress Higgins, a witch, who urged Hester Prynne to come to the forest and become a disciple of the black man. So here is the witch. Who is the witch? That is Mistress Higgins. So here is the character we read in Scarlet Letter, Mistress Higgins, and who urges Hester Prynne to come to the forest and become a disciple of a black man. Later on, Mistress Higgins was executed as a witch. The fact that she was a sister of Governor Bellingham could not save her life. The fact that she was a sister of Governor Bellingham and could not save her life. The Puritans in New England were mortally afraid of the witches and the black man of the forest. Okay, so the Puritans afraid of whom? The Puritans in New England were mortally afraid of the witches and the black man of the forest. Both Hester Prynne, the fallen woman, and the Arthur Dimmesdale, the guilty priest, had to contend with witches and the black man of the forest. Both Hester Prynne, the fallen woman, and Arthur Dimmesdale. Here is another character, the Arthur Dimmesdale. Okay, first we read two characters, that is Mistress Higgins and the Hester Prynne, and another character is Arthur Dimmesdale. The guilty priest had to contend with witches and the black man of the forest. Far from being utopia, the life of the Puritans in New England took the shape of a grim battle between good and evil. The protagonist had to save his soul in this struggle. Okay, far from being utopia, the life of the Puritans in New England took the shape of a grim battle between good and evil. The protagonist had to save his soul in this struggle. Then Hawthorne's life and works. Okay, Hawthorne's birthplace, Union Street, Salem, and here it is Hawthorne's birthplace, that is Union Street, Salem. Okay, so if the question arises, where is the birthplace of Nathaniel Hawthorne, you can write in the answer of NET exam and also MEG06 exams. Hawthorne's birthplace was Union Street, Salem. Then Nathaniel Hawthorne was born at Salem, Massachusetts, in a prominent Puritan family that had migrated to New England in the early 17th century. His father was a sea captain and his mother came from an ancient family called Mannings. Okay, so what was his father doing? His father was a sea captain and his mother came from an ancient family called the Mannings. He lost his father when he was barely 4 years old. Consequently, the child spent his early life at the Mannings home. Okay, the family called Mannings is the maternal home. So where Nathaniel Hawthorne spent his early life. At the age of 9, he became lame for a while and developed a love of solitude, mostly spent in reading books. Okay, at the age of 9, he became lame for a while. Okay, at the age of 9, he became lame for a while and developed a love of solitude, mostly spent in reading books. So, at the age of 4, he lost his father, and age of 9 he became lame. Okay, one of his leg was disabled for a while and developed a love of solitude, mostly spent in reading books. There were plenty of books, and Hawthorne loved in particular the works of Spencer, Bunyan and Shakespeare. There is no wonder that allegory and Christian symbolism are so pronounced in the Scarlet Letter. So, what types of allegory and symbolism are present or pronounced in Scarlet Letter? You can write in answer of NET exam and MEG06 exam. There is no wonder that allegory and Christian symbolism. Okay, there is no wonder that allegory and Christian symbolism. Okay, here it is the allegory and Christian symbolism that is present in the Scarlet Letter. Okay, then the historical romances of Sir Walter Scott also had an impact on Hawthorne. Okay, the historical romances of Sir Walter Scott. So, the historical romances of whom? You can answer the question, the historical romances of Sir Walter Scott. Okay, so you can write the Sir Walter Scott's. Okay, so here it is the historical romances of Sir Walter Scott. You can write Sir Walter Scott also had an impact on Hawthorne that he started reading the annals and old records of New England in order to come to terms with the past. Then the campus at Bowdoin College, that is 1820. You can see the picture. Okay, the campus of Bowdoin College. You can see the picture. The campus of Bowdoin College, that is 1820's picture. The Hawthorne attended the Bowdoin College in Maine. Okay, so Bowdoin, Bowdoin College in Maine, Maine. He made many friends during his college days. One of his friends was Horatio Bridge, who later on subsidized the publication of his first collection of stories, Twice Told Tales. Okay, one of his friends was Horatio Bridge. You can write down, one of his friend was Horatio Bridge. So, jot down the point in your notebook while I was scripting of main key points. Okay, here it is the one of his friends, Horatio Bridge, who later on subsidized the publication of his first collection of stories, Twice Told Tales. So, who wrote Twice Told Tales? So, Twice Told Tales was written by Horatio Bridge, one of the friends of Nathaniel Hawthorne. Okay, one of the friends of Nathaniel Hawthorne. You can write down. You can write down Twice Told Tales, 1837. It was written by Horatio Bridge, who was a friend of Nathaniel Hawthorne. He also befriended Franklin Pierce, who became the 14th president of the USA. Okay, he also befriended Franklin Pierce, who became the 14th president of the USA, and it was through him that Hawthorne managed to get the consulship at Liverpool in England. As a college student, Hawthorne had started writing stories, but it was only on his return to Salem that he published his first work of fiction, Fansway. As a college student, Hawthorne had started writing stories. Okay, as a college student, Hawthorne had started writing stories, but it was only on his return to Salem that he published his first work of fiction, Fansway. As a college student, Hawthorne had started writing stories. Okay, as a college student, Hawthorne had started writing stories, but it was only on his return to Salem that he published his first work of fiction, Fansway. So, here it was only return to Salem that he published his first work of fiction, Fansway. It was an anonymous publication at his own expense, and he never admitted publicly his authorship of the book. The keenness of Hawthorne to become a writer is, however, expressed trenchantly in his letter to his mother. He wrote to her, I do not want to be a doctor and live by men's diseases, nor a minister to live in their sins, nor a lawyer and live by their quarrels. Okay, Nathaniel Hawthorne, the keenness of Hawthorne to become a writer is however expressed trenchantly in his letter to his mother. Okay, so he expressed his thoughts in trenchantly. Trenchantly means very emotionally to his letter to his mother. He wrote to her, I do not want to be a doctor and live by men's diseases. So, I do not want to be a doctor who live in a men's diseases. Only disease related things and men's diseases. I don't want to be a doctor and live by men's diseases. Okay, nor a minister to live by their sins. Okay, I don't want to be politicians or a ministers to live by their sins, nor a lawyer. Okay, and live by their quarrels. So I don't see that there is anything left for me but to be an author. Introduction, the Scarlet Letter. Hawthorne continued to lead a secluded life at Salem after his graduation and soaked himself in the history of colonial New England. Hawthorne continued to lead a secluded life at Salem after his graduation and soaked himself in the history of colonial New England. It was the life and thought of the early settlers that preoccupied him most of the time. Okay, so it was the life and thought of the early settlers that preoccupied him most of the time. During summer, he traveled to various parts of the New England and familiarized himself with contemporary life. He also began writing stories but found it difficult to publish them. Publishers were not keen on publishing stories by an unknown author. He destroyed many of the stories that he wrote. It was, however, in 1837 that he was able to get his first collection of stories published. As mentioned earlier, Twice Told Tales was published with the help of his colleague, friend Horatio Bridges. Okay, then the Scarlet Letter. The Sophia Amelia, here Peabody, Hawthorne, 1847. Okay, here it is a picture of Sophia Amelia Peabody, Hawthorne, 1847. So, Hawthorne had also fallen in love with Sophia Peabody, the youngest of the famous Peabody sisters of Salem. Okay, Hawthorne had also fallen in love with Sophia Peabody, the youngest of the famous Peabody sisters of Salem. His marriage brought him happiness and anxiety as well. It was difficult for him to support his wife and family on the meager earnings from his writing. He sought a job in the custom house at Boston from 1839 to 41 and at Salem from 1846 to 49. He sought a job in the custom house at Boston from 1839 to 41 and at Salem from 1846 to 49. He also participated in an experiment in communal living at the socialistic settlement of Brook Farm in 1841. He also participated in an experiment in a communal living at the socialistic settlement of Brook Farm in 1841. He stayed at Brook Farm along with his wife for a while, but it did not really solve his financial problem. The pursuit of utopia appeared to him impractical and unrealistic. You can find a skeptical reference to a utopia in the Scarlet Letter. Hawthorne returned to Salem and found himself in a difficult situation. He had financial problems and along with the burden of supporting two daughters, he had also to endure his mother's illness and death. He had financial problems and along with the burden of supporting two daughters, he had also to endure his mother's illness and death. He began the writing of the Scarlet Letter at a time when he was deeply depressed and heartbroken. Okay? He began the writing of the Scarlet Letter at a time when he was deeply depressed and heartbroken. There is no wonder that he described it as a hell-fired story embodying all his pent-up emotions. Okay? There is no wonder that he described it as a hell-fired story embodying all his pent-up emotions. The publication of the Scarlet Letter in 1850 marked a turning point in Hawthorne's life. He became famous, but it did not bring him a fortune. Herman Melville was so fascinated by the masterpiece of sin and redemption in New England that he dedicated his magnum opus Moby Dick to Nathaniel Hawthorne. Okay, Herman Melville was so fascinated by the masterpiece of sin and redemption in New England that he dedicated his magnum opus Moby Dick to Nathaniel Hawthorne. Henry James made a pioneer study of Hawthorne as a master of American fiction. Henry James made a pioneer study of Hawthorne as a master of American fiction. During his stay at Concord, Hawthorne also came in contact with thinkers like Emerson and Thoreau. Concord was famous of colony writers in New England and is associated with the development of Transcendentalism. This school of philosophy laid stress in the divine in man and in the infinite capacity of man for bettering his self. Hawthorne was not a transcendentalist like Emerson and Thoreau and affirmed in the last chapter of the Scarlet letter, we were sinners all alike. But some traces of its philosophy could be found in his portrayal of Hester Prynne and Pearl. The romantic idyllic scenes inside the forest showing the coming together of Hester, Pearl and Dimmesdale remind us of the benign influence of nature in Thoreau's Walden. Scenes inside the forest showing the coming together of Hester, Pearl and Dimmesdale remind us of the benign influence of nature in Thoreau's Walden. From 1852-53, Hawthorne was the peak of his creative power. The House of Seven Gables was published in 1851 and showed his preoccupation with the past in New England. It is a work that shows the decline of family that had to bear the curse of witch hunting. Blithedale Romance, Blithedale Romance was published in the next year and was a sarcastic rendering of Hawthorne's experience of living at Brook Farm. So here it is a main key point you can write down, that is the Blithedale Romance. Here it is the Blithedale Romance was published in the next year and was a sarcastic rendering of Hawthorne's experience of living at Brook Farm. The Life of Franklin Pierce was published in the same year. It was Hawthorne's contribution to the presidential election campaign. The president appointed Hawthorne the consul at Liverpool in England. The stay in England gave Hawthorne a chance to imbibe afresh and the influence of mother country. He also got a chance to stay in Italy and wrote his last major work, The Marble Faun, 1860, in which the experience of an expatriate American artist in Rome is narrated. On his return to America, Hawthorne settled down in his Concord home. His health deteriorated and he undertook a trip to mountains and seashore in the company of his old friend Franklin Pierce. His health deteriorated and he undertook a trip to mountain and seashore in the company of his old friend Franklin Pierce. He died quietly in sleep and was buried in grave near Concord home. The grave was named Sleepy Hollow. His unfinished romances were published after his death. Septimus Phelon in 1872, the Dolliver Romance in 1876, Dr. Grimshaw's Secret in 1883 and the Ancestral Footsteps in 1883. Then American fiction. Hawthorne described himself as a romancer rather than a novelist. He was, however, an admirer of the realistic novel as developed in England and admired the realism of Anthony Trollope. In the realistic novel, the focus was an ordinary life of men and women living in a largely settled society. The social and economic background was described by the novelist comprehensively and the protagonist acted and interacted in such a manner that the conflict was resolved at the end. The realistic novel largely developed in the 18th century. England as a comedy of manners and usually had a happy ending. It embodied the confidence and robust optimism of an age of reason, and there was perhaps no problem in life that couldn't be solved satisfactorily. From Fielding's Joseph Andrews to Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, we find the great tradition of the realistic novel flourishing. Apart from the realistic novel as it developed in England, Hawthorne was also influenced by the historical romances of Sir Walter Scott. He wanted to reconstruct the colonial past of the New England as authentically as Scott did for Scotland. Apart from the realistic novel as it developed in England, Hawthorne was also influenced by the historical romances of Sir Walter Scott. He wanted to reconstruct the colonial past of the New England as authentically as Scott did for Scotland. There was, however, a basic difference between Scott and Hawthorne. So, reconstruct the colonial past of New England as authentically as Scott did for Scotland. There is, however, a basic difference between Scott and Hawthorne. While Scott's impulse was to glorify and celebrate the heroism of the protagonist, Hawthorne's attitude towards New England and Puritanism was both critical and sarcastic. In the Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne examined trenchantly the myopia, intolerance, and cruelty of the Puritans in mid-17th century New England. The major protagonists like Hester Prynne, Arthur Dimmesdale, and Roger Chillingworth are utterly lonely and alienated from the community of early settlers in Boston, the major city of New England. There is no wonder that the historical romance was developed by Hawthorne ends on a note of gloom and despair. There is no happy resolution of the conflict, and the major protagonists live in dark and cheerless world. Poor is the only protagonist in the tale who achieves a degree of success and happiness in her pursuit. One can describe the Scarlet Letter as a historical romance or a romance novel in the extraordinary, the marvelous, and strange experiences are vividly pictured. The use of the supernatural and the mysterious creates a kind of awe and grandeur in the somber tale. Consequently, the protagonists are more than realistic and lifelike. They are larger than life and seem to embody certain states of mind. If Hester Prynne and Arthur Dimmesdale represent the repentant sinner, Roger Chillingworth stands for the unrepentant sinner. Okay, Dimmesdale represent the repentant sinner, where Roger Chillingworth stands for the unrepentant sinner. If Paul has the touch of mischievous spirit, Roger Chillingworth degenerates into devil that is beyond any redemption. To sum up, Hawthorne is able to create through his dark, brooding imagination a neutral territory somewhere between the real world and the fairyland, where the actual and imaginary may meet, and each imbue itself with the nature of the other. In other words, as a romancer, Hawthorne is able to encompass both the actual and the imaginary in his narrative. While the actual is transformed into something strange and dreamlike, the imaginary is made concrete and tangible through symbols. There is no wonder that symbols play such a decisive role in the Scarlet Letter. To cite an example, the red letter affixed on the bosom of Hester Prynne becomes a sacred object that sums up the entire life and destiny of a sinful woman in Puritan-dominated New England. It also seems to encompass the myopia, intolerance, and cruelty of the Puritan community in colonial America. With his capacity to encompass both the actual and the imaginary, Hawthorne made a definitive contribution to the emergence of the native tradition of American fiction. The romance novel or historical romance as developed in America was not preoccupied with manners of various groups in a largely settled society with the achievement of success. It was preoccupied with the struggle of good and evil in the protagonist's soul in a strange continent where wilderness was much larger than settlements. Okay, in where wilderness was much larger than settlements. You can write down the note here. The wilderness was much larger than the settlements. Okay, here it is the main key point. Wilderness was much larger than the settlements. In such an unsettled continent, the protagonist felt utterly alienated and had to endure alone the unfolding drama of sin and redemption. There is no wonder that Hawthorne's imagination is preoccupied with the black man of the forest, that is devil. Okay, let us sum up. The early Puritan settlers in New England considered themselves as God's chosen people, whose mission was to set up a utopia in the New World. Consequently, their attitude towards dissenters and heretics like Annie Hutchinson was full of righteous anger and intolerance. Nathaniel Hawthorne was born in a family of Puritans, but he was very critical of the persecution of heretics and dissenters. He was also very keen to become a writer, and with the publication of the Scarlet Letter 1850, he became famous all over America. Inspired by the tradition of realistic novels in England and also the historical romances developed by Sir Walter Scott, Hawthorne established the native tradition of American fiction in which both reality and romance, the ordinary and the marvelous, and the natural and supernatural are artistically fused. This form of American fiction could be described as historical romance or a romance novel in which the actual and the imaginary are dovetailed. Okay, here it is the main key points you can write down in your descriptive papers also. So again I am telling, inspired by the tradition of realistic novels in England and also the historical romances developed by Sir Walter Scott, Nathaniel established the native tradition of American fiction in which both reality and romance, the ordinary and the marvelous, and the natural and supernatural are artistically fused. Okay, so this form of American fiction could be described as a historical romance or a romance novel in which the actual and the imaginary are dovetailed. Here it is the glossary. What is utopia? A state where all ideal conditions exist. Utopia means a state where all ideal conditions exist. You can develop your vocabulary also. Here it is the glossary. The scaffold of the pillory. The wooden structure of the pillory where a sinner was made to stand and exposed to public ridicule in colonial New England. This the pillory means the wooden structure of the pillory where a sinner was made to stand. Okay, which the main culprit or sinner was made to stand and exposed to public ridicule in colonial New England. The black man of the forest, devil, who was supposed to live in dark forest and to trap the soul of the sinners. Okay, here it is the background. The day when judgment day, okay, the day when God will judge all men. Then retribution of God, just and stern punishment inflicted by God. What is retribution of God? Just and stern punishment inflicted by God. The election sermon, an important day in colonial New England when the new governor took charge of his duty. The election sermon, important day in colonial New England when the new governor took charge of his duty. It was a day of celebration and triumph. Then necromancy, communicating with dead through magic in order to learn about the future. Okay, then scorching stigma, marks of remorse and intense suffering over the heart of the guilty priest Arthur Dimmesdale. For Hester Prynne, the Scarlet Letter became the burning stigma. Therefore, she wanted to throw it away when she went to the forest. So here it is the question. You can write down in your notebook. How did the Puritans in New England regard themselves? What was their attitude to morals? Why did Nathaniel Hawthorne choose to be a writer? Write a brief note on transcendentalism. How did Nathaniel Hawthorne's historical romance differ from that of Sir Walter Scott? Do you agree with the view that Hawthorne successfully created a neutral territory in his romance, The Scarlet Letter? Here it is the suggested reading. Then we come to the unit 7, the reading the test in next video. Okay, keep subscribing, like and share my video and push the bell icon to get the earliest notification of study with master notes. Thank you viewers.